Podcast with your host, Jake Weaver. Engineered by Cedric Swan. Hey everybody, we're back with another episode of Midnight on Earth. I'm here today with the wonderful Tyler Penor, but first, before we get to Tyler, I just want to say a few things. Please go to our Instagram and follow us. It's what we do now to stay connected. You're going to find out about the episode. You're going to find out about when things drop. You're going to get insightful comments. You're going to get a glimpse into our world at midnight_on_earth. At midnight_on_earth. I don't know why they make you put the underscores on there. I could have had it all one word, but it just looked a little more legible that way. So go there, follow us. Spotify, Apple Podcasts, we're on every platform. And golden rule is please tell a friend, the other golden rule. And today, so here we go. Today we're talking about astrology with an incredible human being. His name's Tyler Penor. Now, Tyler Penor is the founder of the School of Living Astrology and a practicing astrologer whose mission is to restore the art back to its roots as a tool to understand ourselves and to live in balance and harmony with nature and the world we live in. His personal astrological journey began in the year 2000 at age 15 and began sharing his services as an astrologer in 2010. Living Astrology is the name he gives to his specific style and approach to astrology, as his focus is on the present moment and living in tune with nature and its cycles. He's not a fortune teller or a magician. He's a humble astrologer who comes from the heart and is sincere as doing his best to help others to believe in themselves and to reach their highest potential. That's kind of what this podcast is about. His grand vision. I love people with grand visions. That means they're moving forward. They have momentum. His grand vision is to help restore the art of astrology back into our daily lives in a way that's practical and comprehensible, in order to reignite our mystical connection to life once again, and to join with other like-minded individuals and share these teachings with the world. It's the responsibility of the astrologers alive now to pass on the wisdom that they've received and to teach the proper use of this powerful healing art. Tyler Penor, how are we doing out there? How you doing, Tyler?
I'm doing great. Yeah, thanks for having me on, man. Really appreciate it.
No worries. You're an incredibly interesting human. You have so much to share, and we want to learn so much about astrology. That's why we're here, and specifically your type of astrology. But first, I just want to say thank you for being on the podcast.
You're very welcome.
You're putting energy out there. You're being gracious. You're being generous. I like to talk about how we have listeners in 14 countries. Hopefully that grows to all the countries. And you're getting this information out to the world, to so many people. And then those people are going to tell people and tell people. So we're so glad to have you on here.
Yeah, thanks.
So we're here to talk about astrology. So as we talked about in your bio, your journey through astrology began in the year 2000 at the age 15. So what happened when you were 15 years old that first called you to astrology? The standard astrology, because this isn't your living astrology. This is the standard astrology, just the astrological kind of frequency, the astrology, the feeling, the vibration. What called you to that?
Well, actually, when I was really young, kind of taking it back, I remember the first time my mom was like, your mom, she's a Taurus. I'm a Taurus, so I'm like the bull, and your dad, he's a Leo, and so he thinks he's the king, but you're a Libra, so you're a people person. That's why you like people, and I remember kind of just thinking at that moment, I was maybe like 9 or 10, like, so when we're born has something to do with how we are, you know. And I've always been especially when I was really, really like a young kid, I was the kid who was like, how come? Why? How come this? How come that? I wanted to know everything. You know, I'm a very curious person.
I
And
think that's a Libra
uh,
trait.
yeah, and so basically, you know, hearing about it, and obviously I knew about the whole, you know, back of the magazine horoscope type stuff. But yeah, when I was 15, I was just in a library. Actually, I was kind of like in the in school suspension kind of thing, and because I was kind of rebellious at that time, and I just came across this book. It's pretty famous one. It's called "The Only Astrology Book You'll Ever Need." You
Of
know,
course.
um, and and I like started reading through this, and then I realized there's this whole deeper aspect to it. There's a whole birth chart, you know, and so there's more than just the kind of sun sign stuff, you know, um, and then I was like, oh, of course, you know, there's more than 12 people on this planet. That makes sense. It's more specific, you know. And so I got my chart, you know, I went online and used like some free thing and got my chart and started. I took that book home and I just kind of started diving into it. And there was like it was like just this never ending kind of journey from then on. You know, it was like I was curious about it and I started getting a bunch of books and, you know, just kind of studying it on my own. And it was kind of just something that I was into. It was like a personal thing of mine. And then later on, you know, my late teens, I got into some you know deeper addictions, opiate addiction, and went into quite a dark place and ended up, you know, quitting on my own and went through this completely transformational moment in my life when I turned 21 and in the midst of it almost died in a car accident. And so this big kind of, you know, life awakening happened at that time. And astrology was something that was there, you know, that I always kind of just, it you know, went on that journey with me. And then after that, I realized, you know, I wanted to put my life back together. And so I started my own kind of healing journey, you know, trying to fix my life up. And, you know, I was a construction worker. And so, basically I just kind of made this turn like, okay, there's something to astrology. There's something to it. You know, I noticed the cycles that were going on, you know, in my chart during that time. And, but out of studying, you know, for years and gathering all these books and all this information, there was just a piece that was missing. There was like something I was searching for. I didn't know what it was. Um, and I just kind of got to this point where I was like, well, where did astrology actually come from? Like, what's the roots of it? Like, this system works, but like, what's the core? Where does it come from? And at that time, I ended up just saying, okay, I'm going to put all the books down and I'm just going to turn to nature. You know, so I started just paying attention to the actual cycles and being like, okay, astrology is, you know, the signs are comprised of the four elements. And so nature, there's four elements, you know, fire, earth, air, and water. And
so this is when you started to develop your living astrology. But when, like, as you were younger, to back it up a little bit, like, when did you feel like you had a really strong understanding of traditional astrology, which is, you know, and let's explain actually for the listeners out there, maybe that's never heard of astrology before, and we'll get into your type of astrology, but let's help people understand in a very basic way the traditional astrology. So you have 12 signs of the zodiac, and those are your birth signs, right?
Well, so there's the 12 signs, which are, you know, we have fire signs, earth, air, and water. So, you know, it's the stuff we hear about, you know, Aries, Taurus, Gemini. And so, you know, I guess when you say the word astrology to a lot of people, there's a perspective that has been built, I feel like, over the last maybe 100 or 200 years, which is that kind of fortune telling, you know, daily horoscope type astrology, you know,
which is related to what the day you were born, right? So let's say you were born in March.
It's all sun sign.
Yeah,
it's like sun sign astrology.
Right, and it's the very basic sunshine astrology. So the day you were born, and they don't even in the basic astrology, like the newspaper astrology, they don't really take into the account like the time you were born and the physical place you were born. They just look at
Right.
the bare date you were born, and then from there, you determine what your sign is based on the 12 signs of the zodiac. So for me, you're like me. You're a Libra. I'm a Libra. I was born on October 6th. So
Yep.
so that makes me a Libra. And what day were you born?
October 17th.
17th. We're pretty close. So you're
Yeah.
getting creeping up on Scorpio, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when does
Correct.
Scorpio start? Right about that time, like 20 something? I'm not sure exactly.
Yeah, like the 22nd
Okay,
is
yeah,
that
that's
time.
right.
Mm-hmm.
So then from there you can when we're just talking about traditional astrology for a minute. So from there you can expand out, and you can add in things like the moon signs. Like, so the place where the
Mm-hmm.
moon was where you were born could be in a different zodiac style, a constellation. It was resting in a different constellation. So you have your sun sign, your moon sign, and then it could go on and on from there, right? What are some of the
Mm-hmm.
add-ons? I mean, I know there's like houses, and what are some of the things that when you're continuing with past the moon sign?
Yeah, so basically when you're moving beyond that kind of generalized sun sign astrology, we're talking about the whole birth chart, which basically is from the moment you were born, the place, the date and the time. How was everything arranged around you in that moment? So what was rising on the eastern horizon? That's what we call the rising sign. The ascendant also is what it's known as. And was the sun above in the sky? Was it below? And so it's basically a map. It's like this, when you look at a birth chart, it's like a two-dimensional map of how everything was around you the moment you were born. So you have the entire solar system, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn. Um, and so where were those things located? And that location is what you determine as the houses, so
Okay.
and actually, kind of going to what you said about constellations, there is a difference between signs and constellations. And this is a big kind of thing that like a lot of like scientists love to like disprove, astrology. Like, they're like, oh, well, the stars have changed, so actually, you're not a Libra, you're a Virgo, because the sun is actually in the constellation of Virgo. But there's a difference. It's funny because astrologers are like, yeah, we know precession of the equinoxes is a thing. The stars and the constellations shift, over a roughly 26,000 year cycle. But signs are created, the ones we use in, Western astrology. Um, those are created by the equinoxes and the solstices. So the 0 degree point of Aries is what we would call here in the northern hemisphere the spring equinox. So that's where Aries begins, and so constellations, the actual organization of the stars, those are separate from what we would call signs, and that can be very
Ah,
confusing for
that
people.
I had no idea. I'm going to be completely honest. I'm pretty versed in astrology, actually not as much as you, obviously, but I had no idea. I thought for sure that it rested on the constellations, and then when people bring things up, like people are there trying to debunk or whatever their trip is,
Mhm.
like they want to be negative, and they're like, haha, see, haha, but
Yeah,
then you're
there's actually 13
yeah,
constellations.
but you're clearing that up right now for people, actually, because there's probably millions of people like me that don't know this. So that you're clearing this up, that it's not the constellation, it's where it was, where the stars were initially when you were born. Explain that one more time. I'm sorry.
So so basically the wheel of what we call the tropical zodiac is created, think of it almost seasonally. It's based on the relationship of the earth and the sun, right? So the
Okay.
earth travels around the sun, and there's an angle to the axis. So if you actually watch the sun throughout the seasons, the sun gets higher in the sky up here in the northern hemisphere during the summer, and then winter it's moving lower, and so we have the solstices, which are those two parameters. So at the winter solstice, the sun hits the lowest point in the sky it will be, and it sits there for 3 days, and then it begins to ascend back up higher into the sky. And the equinox is when it's in line with the equator, of the planet. So we have the equal day, equal night. So that's the difference. Is signs are the relationship of the Earth spinning around the sun. Constellations
Ah,
are the backdrop, and that slowly moves over a period of roughly 26,000
right,
years,
which
which
is
gives us our ages, you
right, the
know. Um,
precession of the equinoxes, which is where people get the term the age of Aquarius and the age of Pisces.
yep.
Coming out of the age of Pisces, going into the age of Aquarius right now, for people that are wondering. Um,
Yep. So
but
a good way to
wow,
think about it is like a wheel, right? There's the wheel of constellations, which moves at a much longer period of time. And then there's the wheel of the zodiac, of the tropical zodiac, which is the Earth spinning around the sun. And then there's the wheel of houses, which is created by the Earth spinning on its axis once a day. So we have the horizon line, so basically the directions here on Earth, so that's why other astrologers know, like when you talk about the first house, it kind of sounds like the sign of Aries, and the second house kind of sounds like, the sign of Taurus, because it's identical cycles, just different layers of time. So
okay,
think like seasonally, we have spring, summer, fall, and winter. Every day we go through a mini version of the seasons.
right.
Sunrise is spring, noon is summer, sunset is fall, midnight's winter. The colors are the same, even the feeling is the same, so
So the
like in the
houses,
morning.
so the houses represent that daily cycle that we go through.
Correct. That's why they're
Ah,
the nouns of astrology. They're related to the areas of our daily life. Are we talking about our identity, our sense of, you know, values and self-worth, the things we have? Are we talking about what we'd call our career, our vocation? So they're the nouns of astrology. They're the areas of life, and they're the areas when we look at our birth chart, what area of the sky was the sun? So you could be a Libra, but you were born at noon, so maybe your sun is way up at the midhaven by the 10th house. But if you were born at midnight, the sun would be at the bottom of the chart, underneath the horizon. So houses give us the specifics, of, like the areas of life that those planets, which are the different bodies, layers of our being, where do we access them? Where do we work with them at?
so is that how an astrologer, a traditional astrologer, would hone in on people's daily life? They can give people a daily reading because they're not only looking at those bigger cycles, they're looking at the houses, which is the daily cycle, and then each layer, which represents different parts of time, right?
Yeah. So kind of, I guess, to even put it in a way that is understandable, you can think of planets are like the verbs, in the
Okay.
language of astrology. They're the active action points. Like, Mercury is like the thought and the mind body. Mars is our active, energetic body. And so signs are they're like the coloration, the adjectives, the descriptive ways that these planets move. And then the houses, those are the nouns, the areas of life that they express themselves through. So that's how we get really
Interesting.
specific. And you can only have houses if you know the place and the time of birth.
Right.
So
So without that, it's very specific information. It's really hard to get a true, accurate reading. And, I was thankful to get that information on my birth certificate. I don't know if the time of birth is as common anymore on people's birth certificates. Hopefully it is, but you do need all that going into a reading. So from
yeah,
there,
I mean, you can still do effective, consultations with people if you don't have the time of birth. I do it a lot. And a lot of times I can actually, through a series of questions, figure out around what time they were born.
okay.
Um, so, so yeah, and it's just as effective. So yeah, there's a lot of ways,
So
to kind of
before you
get close.
developed your living astrology, and then you're studying traditional astrology, which just seems like you really got a firm handle on. So like, how old were you when you felt like you really got it? Where you were like, okay, I got it. Was it like around 2010 when you started really, sharing your services? Is that, or was that before?
I mean, I don't ever feel like you really got it. It's a never-ending journey, um, but I feel like I learned the basics, you know, the traditional form and many different forms too. I was studying everything from, Eastern, Western, Mayan astrology. I was into all of it. But what I came to realize is that beyond all those different layers, it's the core pattern that is really important, and that's really where everything changed. And once I saw that core pattern in a bunch of things, like all of the sacred arts have that same core fundamental pattern within them.
What is that
Um,
pattern?
so it's kind of like it's the pattern of creation, and if you look at any wisdom tradition, they all work with the same thing, fire, earth, air, water. You'll see the three modes, like in Western astrology, you have cardinal, fixed, and mutable, which is basically just like initiating, holding, and then changing. It's just the trinity of life, right? And let's see, in Vedic, they have the Vata, Pitta, Kapha. You see that trinity in everything. So they're like they're almost like different lenses. You can look at the lens of four. We have east, west, south, north, fire, earth, air, water. So that it's like the imprint that the foundational pattern that creates everything is identical because we're all looking at the same life. So of course when you start to look at life and the way it moves, that pattern will emerge because it's in everything, kind of like I was saying with
Yeah,
our
the Holy
four
Trinity.
seasons at the times of day.
It's like the Holy Trinity. It's just the number three is so sacred in so many cultures around the world. There's something about the vibration of three that, but yeah, so you're saying you noticed that pattern. So was that when you were in that time in your life where you were, well, like we talked about earlier, you went into nature, you tried to develop your own path. So is this when you were tapping into living astrology and you were figuring this out?
Yeah, so I tapped into it actually through frustration in my study of astrology and this overload of information and kind of just being like, where did this all come from? And turning my eye to nature. It was actually, I was out in nature camping, and I was sitting by a fire, and I was like, okay, I understand this pattern, but how does it work? I wanted nature. It was almost like I asked nature to like show me, and through that, it was in one evening, these stories emerged, stories of the signs, the planets, and the houses. And I started just sharing those stories with people, or just around like campfires and hanging out with people. And
so were these stories that you like intuited? Where were these stories coming from?
Like observing nature, like for example, the signs, the elements. I was like, okay, there's 12 signs of the zodiac. There's fire, earth, air, and water. And there's three of each of them, so I was kind of like, okay, well, what are the three parts of fire? What are the three parts of earth and air and water? And so fire has a spark, and it has light, and then it has the heat, and water has liquid water, frozen water, and then vapors, the three earth kingdoms, plant, animal, and mineral, and so when I started looking at that, I was like, okay, I just went through the motions like, okay, Aries is the first fire. It's the spark of the fire. Okay, that makes sense. And how does that description, of how Aries moves, it moves like a spark. And so I started sharing that with people, these stories. And that is when I started getting asked to look at people's charts. So I never was like, I'm going to be an astrologer. I was a construction worker at that time, So I never sought out to be an astrologer. I just started getting asked to look at charts. And I kind of was like, I don't know how you're supposed to do it. I just know these stories that made it make sense to me. Like once it was like this huge epiphany, like, oh, of course, that is why Aries is that way. This is why Taurus is this way. This is why the sun represents what it does. So these stories emerged, which are the foundation for my entire work I do and the entire school. They're like the seeds that birthed everything.
So it seems like through deep meditation, through just really pondering, through really kind of opening yourself up as a channel, you allowed that information to come in through your own intellect and just kind of developed your own astrology based on spiritual common sense, you could almost say. Just on looking at the cold, hard spiritual facts of certain things and the patterns that you have emerged. And like you said, all kinds of disciplines, whether it's, sacred teachings or plant teachings or whatever, you're seeing these patterns. You start applying these patterns. And this is after you just kind of studied astrology for years and years as a really deep passion. And then once you develop the living astrology, that's when people were attracted to you more. They wanted to know what you thought of things because they felt something very truthful and honest about your astrology. Would you say that's correct?
Yeah, exactly. It was like in that epiphany where it made sense to me. And that's like the key thing I always talk about, like astrology that makes sense and using the senses to make sense, so the elements and nature and things we experience and, relating like the way the solar system is shaped to how we experience what it's like to be a human being, and um, so yeah, through that, it was like the awakening that happened within me and the way it made sense started sharing those stories. And I love stories too because it puts it together. It's not just information, it's like you can actually see the journey of it. You can see,
Right.
why does Aries mean what it does? Where did it come from? Why does Taurus mean what it does? Where did that come from? And the story of the planets, the layers of the solar system that we're built in. We live inside of the solar system. So the way it's shaped, the way it moves, we move the same way and we're shaped and built out of that. So that is where it came from. And then people just kind of from there were like, oh, look at my chart. And I just used those stories in working with people. And that's where it all started basically.
So once you first started doing that and you were giving people these new style of readings that you kind of developed on your own, what were some of their reactions? Did they feel like it was more authentic than anything they experienced before? I'm sure all the reactions were incredibly positive, but did it surprise you at first how receptive people were?
Yeah, and in the early days, it was like it was really basic. I was just kind of like, oh, okay, well, looking at your chart, listening to people. That's the key too. Is it's not about blowing someone's mind or telling them who they are,
Right.
Um, but but yeah, it was like first of all, telling those stories to people. It was I kept getting the same response from people like, wow, I've never heard it put that way, but that makes total sense. And it was like everybody would say that to me after sharing these stories with them. And then they'd be like, "Oh yeah, could you look at my chart?" And so I was like, "Sure." And look at their chart, and everybody, it was amazing. Just the clarity, that comes from that, and the application of nature and using those elements to see and work with these things. It just makes everything tangible, and then it's not like you're just leaving someone with a bunch of thoughts. It's like you can actually go out and work with these things, and these cycles. And um, yeah, and so it was really by word of mouth too. It was like I just kept getting asked and kept getting asked, and then finally I was like, I guess this is something maybe I should do, and people were like, yeah, you should charge people for this, like, and I was like, okay,
And you're trading your energy. I mean, it's your service. You're
mhm.
trying. You're putting your energy out there. People love to pay for things that are beneficial and are actually healing and sincere and honest. So people were feeling that. So they were like, okay, here, take my money, please. Like in a way, right? Like they were just like, please, can you just open an office and start this? So did you then, once you discovered that people were into it and that, like you said, it could be a profession for you, and you would definitely be serving people, like did you get an office, or when did you decide to like take the leap and leave what you were doing, your construction job or whatever you're doing before that, and kind of focus on these astrological readings?
So yeah, actually, it was kind of the timing was interesting. I started doing these, and people were like, "You should charge," and I was charging like $40, $50, um, and at that time, I actually got laid off from work, and I was on unemployment. And I was actually on unemployment for like I think a year, and so it gave me this time to just like focus in on this, and getting asked a lot too, just it was like someone would get one and then tell their friend and tell their friend, and so through that too, it was like I was learning how I should approach this, which was, you know at that point I was also really on my own kind of spiritual and healing journey. It was like really taking into consideration, like I'm not just reading someone's chart, and just like trying to blow their mind. It's like there were people coming to me with like real things, like they wanted help, and so that was where my mind went, was like I'm going to use this avenue of astrology, but my goal is to help people, to listen to people, to help provide clarity, the way that astrology has given me clarity. um and And so that's the number one thing is the healing and the helping. And astrology in the birth chart is just a tool set that I utilize. Um, but yeah, so that's kind of where it all began. Was
So
doing that, and then I started getting asked to teach. After that.
so
So
the living astrology part. So when you do a reading, we're going to talk about your amazing school. Oh my gosh, we have so much cool stuff to talk about your school. But when you're doing a reading, I really want to understand this. So you build it off of a traditional astrological reading. So then you'll give somebody a birth chart, and they'll have everything up to the day, the houses, the planets, all that, and then once you get that birth chart, you then add on your perception, the living astrology method, to then define it further. Is that correct?
yeah, I mean, I guess basically it's like I use the birth chart itself, the traditional birth chart that all astrologers use. That's like our tool.
Right.
But the substance of what I'm talking about um, comes from those stories, and then also, again, this is why I don't call I don't call them readings because there's a difference between a reading and a consultation. So in a reading is like where it's kind of what you can do for yourself. You can go online and go, okay, I have Sun in Libra. What does that mean? And you read it. And a lot of astrologers, that's what they do. They have a chart. Someone gives them, their birth time, and they go, okay, and they start reading it off. And okay, you have your Sun here, Mercury here. This is what this means. And so they're just reading this chart to a living person. So in a way, you're just reducing a living human being to this chart instead of symbols. So what I do is I utilize the chart, but I listen to people. So I've done probably near 1,000 of them by now. So I've listened to 1,000 life stories. I always open up and tell people, um, tell me the general story arc of your life. What was your upbringing like, and maybe the major events, and I tell people to bring it to the present moment, what's going on in their life, what insights are they looking for, and what's their vision for themselves moving forward. And while they're sharing that with me, I'm just observing their chart and seeing how they've utilized it. Because and this is something else I always say is like your birth chart doesn't tell you who you are. It just shows you what you're working with. So it's kind of like imagine it's your tool set or your palette of colors, right? So you're born with these specific palette, this palette of colors, but the picture you paint, that's up to you. How you use those colors is up to you. So for example, Sun in Libra, it's like a tool, right? Like a hammer. You can use a hammer to do a lot of different things. You can build a house with a hammer. You could tear a house down with a hammer. You could paint the hammer and put it on your wall as a piece of art, So there's many different ways to use this. So by somebody sharing their life story, it brings the chart then to life. And that's where the real insights come from. And that way, it's kind of like a horoscope, which is the birth chart, right? It's like a telescope. If you don't point it at anything, you're not going to see anything. So I have to listen and let someone's life filter through the chart, and then that's when you actually see things that really help somebody.
So is that the living astrology? Like when you're bringing in their life story, that's where the living part of living astrology comes into play?
Yep, that and then the fact that I utilize the living patterns in nature, and I'm working with the elements. So we're looking at life, and so the story of nature and the elements and how it moves, which is where astrology was born from, sharing that story with people and using that story of how life moves in harmony and listening to someone's life story, and then you put it together and it heals.
Right.
So where we're off maybe in our life is where we've fallen out of balance with those natural rhythms and cycles. So nature is the key. Nature is the teacher, and that's where the wisdom comes from. And that's where, balance and harmony comes from. So if we look at our life and we just go, oh, this is where that disharmony is happening, and you can find it in the chart, then you apply it to nature and work with that element, and it always works. It always helps, and it always gives an insight, So that's where the living astrology is like. I'm focused on life. Astrology is the second word in it, that's just the tool, it's not the answer. It doesn't, you know, give you the answers
It's
of
part of
birth
the
charts
puzzle.
and
It's almost like
yeah,
30%. It's not even 50% really. It seems like it's like
yeah.
30%. Like you get the birth chart and where's the rest of it? It's like where's the beef? If you're a child of the 80s, you know what that means. But like, so okay, so now you got this new astrology system, this living astrology that sounds so beautiful and so powerful. And then now you want to teach it to people and people are requesting for you to teach it. How did the school develop?
Yeah. I mean, after doing a bunch of work with people, people were curious. They're like, man, like just the way you saw that and how you work with this is like, it's different, and I had actually a lady who, she was an actual astrologer too, and she's a practicing astrologer, but she had heard about me and she wanted me to, do a consultation for her. And she was just like, she said, I learned more in this hour and a half with you than I have in my last 30 years of studying astrology. She's like, you filled all these gaps and brought it to life. And she's like, you must teach this. You have to teach this way of doing it, and so after getting asked over and over, I kind of was like, okay, once again, I guess this is something I should do. And so I was like, okay, well, how do I teach this? Like, it's not something I can tell people, they memorize it and they got it. It's like you have to see it. And so this is where the school, I was like, how do I help people to see what I'm seeing, this pattern and so this is where, I was like, okay, well, the school has to move with the seasons. We'll learn in accordance with the natural cycles, so I was like, it can't just be here's 15 lessons and that's it. It was like, we're going on a journey, we're going to grow together. So at that time, it was like 5 students, people who wanted to do it. And we did, it was 4 3-day weekends throughout the year. So we had springtime, we got together for 3 days and each day was dedicated to a sign and its correlating planet and house. And so I did that for 2 years. I did 2 rounds of that. And then I started getting asked from people like, you got to do something. I can't come to you. I live, in Vermont or something, it's like, can you put this online? Can you make a online thing? And, so that's where I was like, okay. And I made a website and I started putting, recording these videos and putting these lessons together. And interestingly enough, like I did that. The first videos were on a camcorder, and then that actually got me into, oh, I can get a nice camera. What's a mirrorless camera? And so now I'm full blown photographer from from that too. That's like my
Oh,
my
wow.
hobby, and but yeah, that's how it all began, and now we're 4 years in on the online one, and it's amazing because we have people all over the world now. Some students in Europe and Australia and Africa and
And
it's like
isn't
the
that a good
whole
feeling? Isn't that such a good feeling when you know that
yeah.
you created something? Well, it came through you, but through your own
Mhm.
inspiration and intellect, you helped shape it and, came through you and it's connecting with people all over the world and they're doing living astrology. Isn't that such a powerful feeling? Don't you just,
It's the best. It's the most amazing thing. I can't even. Sometimes I say here, I'm like, God, how did I get here? I was a construction worker, but this is like this is amazing, and I get to meet just like the coolest people, and then to see them implement it into their life in the way that is unique to them, because it is such a this way we're learning it is it's something that is born within. It's like we all have these stories and this wisdom, and awakening that perspective, it just adds on to your life, and there's not just one use. It's not like just looking at a chart. It's like it's so much more than that. The thing that I share in this program,
well,
these
it's
programs.
service. We talk so much on this podcast about the value of service and how important it is to just do what you love and then and what your
Hmm.
talents is. Develop your talents and do what you love. And the money can be a byproduct of your service. It could be a lot of money. You can have a lot of money be a byproduct of the service, but the money can never be the goal. The goal is the service, and it feels so
Yep.
good. I mean, it feels so good for me to be on this podcast. I'm sure Tyler feels the same way. It feels so good when we're just doing our service. We're just out there doing our service, and people are benefiting from it. It's such an
Yep.
amazing feeling. So one question I want to ask you about is, because this is something that I want to know about. So when you do a birth chart, like, it's based on the 9 planets of the solar system, correct? Or have they removed Pluto at this point?
So no, we still use Pluto. Some people, there's so many different forms. You could add in a bunch of stuff. Some people add in all the
Well, that's what I
the
wanted to
added
ask you
bells and
about.
whistles.
Well, that's what I want to
Um,
ask you about, because there's supposedly, well, actually not supposedly, but there's dwarf planets. And I didn't even know about this
yeah.
till later in life. Like, I'm embarrassed to say that I did not know that there was more than 9 planets in our solar system. We just only count, and now maybe even 8. We only count 8 or 9. But there's places, dwarf planets like Eris, Haume, Make, a Hawaiian word, Sedna, and actually there's 127 probable planets in our solar system. For people that have never heard this before, still blows my mind. And there's up to 500 possible solar type planets out there. So how do those fit into astrology?
Well, this is where it's like, there's the asteroids, there's all this stuff, and if you add all that in and you look at a chart, it just looks like a yarn ball. It's just it's a mess. And so me, I don't use all that the extra ones, because one, we have to know enough about. You can use it and relate it, in a way that can make sense if you understand it, but we have to learn about it. Like, we become aware of something, and it takes a while for it to reveal what it's about, because we have to
Mm,
learn how it moves. It's like,
right.
for example, we when we discover, a planet, it's like, okay, this seed of this part of our own consciousness now has been planted, but it takes a full journey around the wheel for it to kind of awaken. It's the same with us, right? We're as we grow, we're all different humans, but we have these same cycles. At the age of 2, Mars completes its journey from where it was when you were born, and Mars literally awakens. We call it terrible twos for a reason. The planet of running, jumping, action, anger, the power of the word no. All of that. That's Mars literally awakening at the age of 2.
Yeah, I have 4 kids. I
Uh,
know all about it, man.
and then Jupiter, just shy of a 12-year cycle. Jupiter's this huge gas planet, expansion, growth, and we see puberty happen around that age. And there's
Right.
this growth and expansion. And then, the Saturn return, you've probably heard people talk about, that happens, from
Age
29 to
29.
30.
Yeah.
And so that's where we become an adult, because we're a child up until then. And then we have our adulthood from roughly 30 to around 60, and then you could say the elder phase 60 to 90, and some people make it to another cycle. But yeah, so I only use all the way out to Pluto, and then I use Chiron, because Chiron is
I want to
literally
ask you
the
about
number
that.
one. That's the one that it's prominent in my chart, and it's kind of everything. The work that I do, it's all Chiron based.
So it seems like
Chiron.
the traditional astrology was based on the things that you could see with the planets you could see with the naked eye, right? Because it's so
Correct.
ancient. And then as we develop more technology, we're discovering these other planetary bodies, but we don't have the long-term data, physical data or spiritual data to really determine how these celestial objects affect us energetically. So in time, let's say maybe 1,000, 2,000 years from now, people will go back and listening to this podcast, and they'll be laughing at us because their astrology will be including, or maybe even in the next precession of the equinox, another 26,000 years, they'll be including all those other things and their effects because they'll have that long-term data. That's so interesting to think about. But I want to hear about Chiron. Tell me more about Chiron. So
Yeah.
it shows up in your chart, and what is Chiron and how does it affect you?
So Chiron is this little planetoid, that was most likely caught in our solar system's orbit. So actually, I think, if you don't mind, I could go through the planetary stories, and that's really where I
Dude,
think it can
please,
all make sense.
please, please,
Um,
please.
yeah. So, okay. Yeah. I think your listeners will really love this. It's again, one of those foundational stories. So basically to think about is we exist inside of the solar system. So the way it's shaped, the way it moves is how we move and how we're shaped, so kind of imagine everybody out there, imagine like our solar system, it's like there's these layers. There's the sun at the middle, and then there's a Mercury layer, a Venus layer. So it's kind of like an onion, or think of those, those little Russian dolls where there's a doll inside of a doll.
Matryoshka doll.
So yeah, so we're gonna go from the center and move out, and this is gonna show you why the planets mean what they do and our relationship to it. So the sun sits at the very core. The sun is the life provider. It's the light that gives life to the, without the sun there is no solar system. So this is why the sun in your chart represents that core fire, that consciousness, the light. It's your life body essentially. So that's the core layer. That's the central layer. And then there's Mercury, which revolves really fast around the sun. Well, what's the layer of our being that revolves around the center of our consciousness is the mind. So Mercury is the mind, the mental body. Mercury spins real fast. The mind moves really fast. It's the satellite for the sun. You could say the sun is our heart and Mercury is the mind. Mercury, though, he's so close to the center, sometimes he thinks he is the center, you know, just like our mind's like, yeah, it's me. I'm the middle of everything,
Good old ego.
And so there's a basic teaching there too. Like if you identify with your mind or Mercury as you and your core, you're going to spin in circles around yourself forever. You'll never get to the heart of it. So the sun is the heart, the center, and then Mercury is that mental body. Then we have Venus, and Venus is the layer of the senses, the receptive body, the feminine body. So whether you're a man or a woman, we all are born, we have a feminine nature and a active masculine nature. So Venus is our receptive body, how we take things in, and receive things. And then the next layer is the actual earth itself, which is our actual physical earth body, right? That's, this is where we operate. We're here on earth. So just in that, you can imagine the earth is like this boundary now. Our physical body is a boundary from the internal planets of the sun, Mercury, and Venus, which contained in your physical body are your senses, your mind, and your life force, your heart, your sun. And then so we've reached this boundary now. We have the physical body, and revolving around the earth is the moon. So just like how Mercury revolves around the sun, our mind revolves around our consciousness. It's like the satellite, that catches information, for it. The moon does that for the earth. So our emotional body revolves around our physical body. So the moon is the feelings, and that's what, it reflects the light of the sun and gives it to the earth. How do we feel and receive and reflect things? So that's why on a new moon, the moon is on the inside of that earth layer. If we go just like, that doll kind of thing, the moon is on the inside, closer to Venus, Mercury, and the sun during a new moon. On a full moon, it's on the outside. So it's opposite, the sun. So it's out closer to the external planets of Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. And then even that word, emotion has the word motion in it, right? And then we have 13 moon cycles a year, and we look at our physical body and we have 13 points of motion, in the major joints. We have the ankles, knees, hips, shoulders, elbows, wrists, and then the neck is that 13th point of motion. And then the roughly 28 days of a moon cycle, and count the joints in your hand, you have 28 of them. So the moon, gives us that. And for example, that's why we tend to store our emotions in certain joints. So now it's like, okay, we have the body, and now the first planet outside of the Earth layer is the planet Mars. So Mars is now the active masculine body. So how do we run and jump and do things, so actually moving. And so now we have this ability to run, jump, and move. Mars gives us that energy to do that. But why? What's the goal? What's the story? What are all our actions amounting to? And so that's what Jupiter, this huge gas planet. So now we're moving from rock planets to gas planets. And so Jupiter is that part of us that's our story. It's our lessons. It's our goals. it's the growth, what all our actions are amounting to, and if you think about it, your story, your beliefs, all of those things are more etheric. They're not as solid. It's not a rock planet, so Jupiter, is kind of like the always positive, ever believing, archetype, right? The one who believes. Just, Jupiter's like, he talks to us like, if you believe, you can do anything, and that's just how Jupiter is, which is true. But then we have Saturn who comes along and says, yes, but, there's laws to this world. there's limitations to this world of reality, so Saturn's this gas planet with ice rings around it, and so just because, Saturn says, yeah, just because you believe, you can fly doesn't mean you can jump off of a cliff and actually fly. You have to work within my laws. There's gravity, there's time. This is how we created airplanes and, paragliders. We're working within the laws, the structural laws of reality, this world we call reality. And that's what Saturn represents, that layer of reality. And it's the last planet we can see with the naked eye. So if you think about it, what we can see with the naked eye is what we call the world reality, and so Saturn is that last layer who holds this law of what we call reality, time and space. And so to Saturn, though, we're all the same. You're a human, you're born, you live, you die. We're all, structurally the same, but we all know there's something unique in each and every one of us, that is different. We all are living within the same reality, but yet we each have our own unique viewpoint that nobody sees it through. And so this is what the planet Uranus represents, is the watcher, the observer part of us. And it's even a unique planet. All the other planets spin like a top around the sun, but Uranus rolls, as he goes around. So he's almost like an eyeball that looks into towards the sun part of the time, and then out to the outer planets part of the time. So kind of think too, it's like that part of us, if we're looking at this world of reality, there must be a piece of us sitting just outside of it or beyond it, observing it. So Uranus is like that part of us that, everything within Saturn is affected and changed by reality. So our mind changes, our story changes, our emotions change. But that one part of us that has been the same since the moment we were born till now, like everything physically is different, everything mentally changes, but that observer, that part of you that is observing, that is, and it's not visible to the naked eye, but that's what Uranus represents, is that layer of our being. And like I said, he rolls around the solar system. Part of the time he's looking in, and the other time he's looking out. So we have, when he's looking in, it's kind of like we could say our waking reality, the waking life right now that we are experiencing. It's all Saturn stuff. It's based in time and space. But then there's this other place we go, that we call the dream time, and it's kind of funny because we kind of write it off like, oh, it's just a dream, but it's like, this is a real place that our consciousness goes to, but it's not bound by those Saturn laws of time and space. This is why you could be asleep for, 1 minute, and it can be a whole day, in the dream. So this is what Neptune represents, that layer of the dream time and visions, in the spiritual realm, which isn't bound by the laws of Saturn, time and space, So, and this is really the source of everything. If you look around you right now, everything that a human created was first a vision. They imagined it, they had a vision about it, and then it was built into this reality. So everything comes from that world of Neptune, the world of dreams, the realm of spirit, and so when you're closer to that and you connect to that, that's where, miracles happen. That's where, things that are seemingly impossible are, the opportunity for them, arises. So Neptune represents that layer of our being. And then when you move beyond that, you get to that little demoted planet, Pluto, which is funny because people go, well, Pluto's not a planet anymore. So what does that mean for astrology? I'm like, well, it's still there. It doesn't matter what you call it,
Right. It's not like it just like blew up or something.
Yeah, it's like it doesn't change anything about it. It still moves the same. It's still there. Just because you say it's a planet or a dwarf planet, that's astronomy, astro naming. They name things and decide what we call them. But astrology is more about the actual the logos, the logic. How is it moving? And what does it mean? So Pluto, very small but very powerful. That's the layer because we're getting out now. Neptune, is 164-year cycle. So that part of us that moves in that time period. But Pluto is like the human soul, right? So this is the part that we all share. Pluto moves more civilizations and countries. The United States is going through its Pluto return right now. And so Pluto is the human soul. So that's the one thing we all share. We all have our own mind, our own stories, but we all share the same human soul. We're all part of this one, being, which is humanity. And that's what Pluto is that layer, of ourself. It's like, this is why it's the planet of life and death. He's the bringer of death, which is also the bringer of life. And that's the one thing we all have in common. We're all gonna die. That means we're all alive, all of
Right.
us alive right now. That's something that's what it means. So Pluto is like that doorway of life and death. It's very small but very powerful. And so then there's Chiron, and Chiron, we got to, actually exists in his orbit is very unique. He has an elliptical path around the solar system. So he actually crosses these planetary boundaries. So, in this kind of layers that we've been building, we have that boundary. The Earth is the boundary, our physical body from the internal planets and the internal world to the external world. And then Saturn, which is the boundary of the visible world of reality, and the invisible, realms of Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, the more visionary landscape, and etheric areas. So Chiron, he is roughly a 50-year cycle, and part of his orbit, he exists in between Jupiter and Saturn. And then he moves further out and he moves beyond that layer of Saturn and goes out by Uranus and Neptune. And then he comes back in. So he weaves that boundary of Saturn, of the visible planets to the invisible. So he has one foot in the visible world and one in the invisible world. So he's the weaver of those things, and this is why he's that planet of healing. That's when we're on a healing journey, we're weaving together those things, like we have the physical body and this world of reality, but then we're talking about what about my individuality? What's my vision for my life and my purpose? And so Chiron helps us to move beyond those layers of Saturn, our fears and limitations. And it can be through a conscious effort, to want to focus. Okay, where am I suffering? Where are my hardships? And how do I address them and begin my own healing journey? Or through sometimes a traumatic experience. You hear it all the time, right? Like, oh, I got in this accident, and all of a sudden, I had this epiphany, and I have a vision now, and I realized the preciousness of life. So through that traumatic experience, they were ejected out and got in tune with Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, those layers of ourselves that in our modern society is not totally available to us, And so Chiron brings us and gives us the opportunity to weave those together, So
Is there a
that's the
Chiron
plan,
return? This has been so beautiful. I don't want to interrupt it all, but I just want to ask you, is there, like you talked about the other planets have a return, is there a Chiron return, and when is
Yes.
that?
So it happens at the age of 50 to 51. And surprisingly, so Chiron is my main focus because as an astrologer, you're doing Chiron work, healing is what Chiron's all about. And interestingly enough, I'd say at least a third of my clients are all having around their Chiron return. I get the majority of my clients. And it's probably just because of me, and my what I bring in, that focus on Chiron.
And it's a frequency and it's the energy too, because they're needing to get in touch with their Chiron right at that time, and you're putting that energy out there in the universe. So of course they're attracted to you.
Yeah. Yeah, and so just through that story though, right, of the planets, it shows you why those planets mean what they do. Everything in astrology means what it does because of what it is,
Oh, it's that was
It's actually really simple.
I've never heard that explanation before, and it was like absolutely incredible. Like because I was really closing my eyes and really trying to visualize everything you were saying, and it's just so powerful because it really, the solar system really does reflect. I mean, you hear people say microcosm, macrocosm, but it
Yeah.
it works on so many different levels, and it's so multidimensional. And this is just another aspect of the microcosm, macrocosm, where your being, your living being, the you is reflected in the macrocosm of the solar
Yep.
system and what they each represent. And it's absolutely fascinating. I'm really blown away by this.
Yeah, I mean the core is we are nature. We're reflections of nature, and this nature on Earth is surrounded by our solar system. It lives in this solar system, so that's really all that the astrology I work with implies, is that the way nature moves is the way we move, and it's like nature. I always say that too to my students, like nature is your proof, because there's a lot of astrology that is like very much in the mind, and it's fascinating. There's a lot of different ways you can approach your personal journey of astrology. Um, but to me, the most profound things are the simple things, just like taking what seems complex and just observing in a very sober way at just like nature and the planets and how they move. And it's like that's where those big epiphany moments come from, is just that realization of how all of this complex thing of life, at the core is quite simple, and that's what makes it profound. Is everything reflects upon that core pattern that I
Right.
was
You
kind
can
of talking
break it down to
about.
that pattern, but in that pattern is the infinite, you could say, because it
Yeah.
contains everything. This is just so amazing. I want to know more about this. So is there other prominent things that were in your chart? Like, you talked about Chiron, but then was there other prominent things that weren't planets that were in your chart as well that maybe could have been a focus as well that has a similar meaning to, like all the other planets and the sun that you talked about and the moon?
um well, I mean, personally, my chart has Chiron is in a direct, what you call an opposition, um which is 180 degrees, so they're opposite each other,
Okay.
to my moon. So it's a very personal kind of thing,
Ah,
and the planet Uranus. So my moon and Uranus are what you would call conjunct. They're right next to each other,
okay.
um, and they're actually 1 degree apart. So there's 30 degrees in each sign. So, for example, my moon's 13 degrees Sagittarius, and then Uranus is 15 degrees Sagittarius. So there's that gap at that 14th degree, but opposite Chiron is at 14 degrees Gemini. So it's almost like that Chiron fits in that gap, and it creates
Yeah.
this line. And yeah, and so this is just something. It's almost like, I guess if you simplified it, it's like, in a way, because of the house placement, I speak, the language of Chiron, and I share it with people. It's in my, the seventh house, which is the house of others, where we relate. Um,
Ah.
and so yeah, over time, it was just like, oh, this is how I speak. This is how things logically make sense to me, and how I put these stories together. And so yeah, it's kind of
Well, I can
now
see.
obvious that that's what I do.
Well, I can see why your school's taking off. I mean, this is so powerful that you start doing this on a personal basis. You can learn how to do this yourself by going to the School of Living Astrology, or you can get a reading from a living astrologer, and it's going to be. It sounds like it's going to be exponentially more personal and more authentic than a traditional birth chart reading. But before
Yeah.
we get into that, I want to you said something that I want to touch on. You said that right now, America is in its Pluto return. It's Pluto return.
Hmm.
What does that mean exactly? And what does that mean for America?
Well, but it's simply Pluto at its core, right? Is like, you bring up the words power, purpose, the soul, and um, all if you look back, you could go look back at all other countries from when they begin. Pluto's roughly a 250-year cycle.
Okay.
And at the Pluto return points of countries and large things, civilizations, there's always a shift and change in power, and almost like you could say the soul or the purpose of that country. Like Rome fell in its second Pluto return, so yeah, there's usually like some shift and change in power, or the purpose of that group, or that country, and yeah, and currently the United States, is going through, and it's a long, it's not like a quick thing, because Pluto moves very slow. So we're kind of getting into the thick of it though right now, and it's pretty obvious,
So this is the
and
midpoint. When is America, the end of America's Pluto return? Like 20, 30 years, or what do you think?
I mean, roughly you could, depends on what you would define as how wide a conjunction is, but in probably 4 or 5 years, that's when it's going to start to move beyond that.
Wow.
But you could say we're kind of in the middle of it, right now. And interestingly enough, as I said before too, that when we discover a planet, it takes a full journey for it to go around for us to kind of bring it's almost like awaken it into our normal human consciousness.
Right,
So
to really understand
example,
its characteristics.
yeah, so like for example, Neptune, from when we discovered it in 2011, it reached that point where it was when we first discovered it. And now, 2011, now it's like that world of Neptune has opened up. We saw it in smartphones and 3D movies, and just the fact that now if you can envision it, you can pretty much create it. And spirituality and connecting with that realm is no longer as obscure. It's like more common. People are understanding Neptune on a different level. But yeah, in 20 and speaking on Chiron was discovered in 1977.
Okay.
So I always joke that's when Star Wars came out. It's like Yoda is like a Chiron figure. He's
the spiritual mentor.
Yeah, and so in 2028, in the years of 2027 to 2028, Chiron is going to reach that point where it was when we discovered it. And that's to me where that awakening is going to come. So interestingly enough, at the end of this, the world superpower having its Pluto return, at the end of that, then Chiron kind of awakens, and Chiron is the healer, and right now I feel like I kind of explained this to my wife the other day, like Chiron is like incarnating currently on this planet, and he's that bridge builder between the seen and the unseen, and he's that healer planet. And so I feel like right now in a lot of different fields that it's like if this Chiron bridge is going to get built right now, all the people are perfecting their craft. Like some people are going to be the builders, some people are making the plans, but it's like they're perfecting their craft, and then come that time, in the end of the 2020s, then the bridge starts getting built. That's kind of how I look at it, within just seeing the natural evolution of it. So I feel like right now there's a lot of these Chiron things being awoken, and people trying to bring that about, in their own unique way, and I see it in a lot of different fields, and it really is that bridging of like the seen, the unseen, the past, the present, and really being those bridge builders for.
Well, I have to say this podcast, this podcast is very Chiron, because this podcast is bringing people together from all different types of fields, and we're all trying to find our commonalities, which usually ends up being just love, just like pure love. It's like where we find and then we're tapping into the other world. We're connecting a bridge between this world and all those worlds, talking to wonderful people like you and so many others. So I would say the energy of this podcast is Chiron. We are on board with Chiron. I'm feeling the Chiron frequency right now.
Yeah, and Chiron's whole mission, he's known as the wounded healer, and so you get kind of different perspectives from astrologers, like, oh, it's your wound, where it is in your chart, that's where your wound is. So that's where, and fatalistic, negative, you know, black and white astrologers are like, oh, that's where, you're going to suffer and stuff. But so Chiron itself is human suffering. Now, if you look at human suffering, it's an inevitable thing. Like, part of life is hardship, and there is suffering. But if you look at it, it's like without that, there would be no healing. There would be no blessings in life. There would be, that wisdom. It's almost like to earn that deep, true wisdom of life, you have to like go through hardship.
Sure.
It's kind of ingrained in it, in the hero's journey and everything. So Chiron's whole goal on a big level, and then within each one of our charts, is how do we change our suffering into a blessing? How do we, and we do that through understanding, and that's what it means to like be a healer or go on the healing path, is just that you're addressing your wounds, and you're looking at it, and by doing that, and not ignoring it, you begin to learn. And then it's also like the acceptance of that, right? When you stop looking at like suffering as a negative or a bad thing, and you accept it as this is a part of life, you realize it's also your greatest teacher, and it provides you with the greatest wisdom you could ever want in life, comes through that, addressing the things that are hard, and that are difficult. And that's where that wisdom of life, is born from that. So, that's kind of Chiron's goal, is to, in a simplified way, is just how to transform human suffering into a blessing, and what is that process.
Yeah, it's like alchemy. You're transmuting that. You're transmuting the suffering into something useful.
In the stories, Chiron was the teacher of alchemy, astrology, music, the arts, the sacred rite of hunting, and understanding life and death. And he was that one that, in all those old myths, all the heroes, they learned from Chiron, like the demigods, the half god, half humans, they were all sent to Chiron, to learn, but he didn't teach them like a normal teacher. He taught more through setting up situations that brought you to where you could understand your greatest wisdom and power on your own. So he wasn't like you could say Saturn is like your teacher, but Chiron is more he's like initiator, brings you into initiations of your own, where you discover your own power. And so he would teach those arts that helped you to get there,
So this is Chiron, the figure, not the planet. This is Chiron, the figure of history and myth. Is that what you're talking about? Yeah, the
centaur, in the myths. And, and it's profound, his story, the myth of Chiron. He's like the only figure. He's been to every single realm, and I mean, I could share, my perspective on Chiron's story. And
yeah, go for it.
So basically Chiron was, he was, so one day Saturn, who Kronos, he was his father, and he was down on the earth, and he was mating with this tree nymph, tree spirit, and his wife Rhea came down looking for him, and in order not to get caught, he transformed himself into a horse, and then he climaxed and ran off, and didn't even realize he had impregnated, this spirit. And so Chiron was born as a centaur, a half man, half horse, and so there's that in the story, the initial abandonment, the father gone, but he was born an immortal because he came from, Kronos, or Saturn, the figure of Saturn. And his mother, was like, oh my God, what is this thing I've birthed? It's this beast. And so, she was disgusted and begged Zeus to get rid of her suffering, and transform her into, something else. And so he turned her into a linden tree, and so he was abandoned by his mother and father. But because of that, he was on this mountain, Mount Pelion, where he was raised by nature. He was raised by the animals and the plants. And so he grew up, kind of wild, you could say, right? until the sun and the moon god, Artemis and Apollo came along and found him, and then they took him in and started teaching him, and so you could say the sun and the moon adopted him, right? And started teaching him the ways of hunting, music, how to read the stars, and how to work with plants, and how to heal, and he excelled at these things. And so then he became known, as this person who was, really gifted in the sacred arts, the healing arts, and music and hunting and all that. And so that's when he kind of started getting asked to teach, and he started teaching, the demigods, the half gods, half humans, and he built this thing that he called the Chironium, which is where my website name came from.
Nice.
Which is, it's like his healing temple where he did his work. He had his like observatory, and he taught this school. He taught had all the demigods come, and he taught Achilles, and he taught Hercules, and Jason from Jason and the Argonauts, and put them all on their quests, basically, and so at this point, he's teaching, and then he told Hercules, you're going to fight this beast called Hydra, which was that multi-headed, beast. And he's like, the blood of Hydra is the most poisonous poison in existence, So what you're going to do when you defeat it is dip your arrows in that blood, and it'll help you to defeat, the Nemean lion, which you'll have to face later, which kind of was symbolic for like his own ego, the lion, So he did that, and Hercules ended up coming over and, visiting Chiron. He let all these other centaurs that were born out of storm clouds live on his mountain with him, and they were kind of drunkards, they were partiers, wild, these other centaurs. And Hercules was friends with them. And so he came, and he basically, they got really drunk, and this brawl, broke out one evening. And Chiron, he was up in his, Chironium, and in his lab, studying, and he heard this commotion, and he came out to see what was going on. And Hercules was drunk, shooting these arrows in all these different directions, and one of those arrows, went and hit Chiron right in the leg. Oh. And so, he runs in pain, but he's an immortal. He can't die. Now this arrow with this blood of Hydra would kill anything, immediately, but he was an immortal. He couldn't die. So he's suffering, and he's in this excruciating pain, and he's a healer. So he's like, I'm going to try and heal myself, and so now from then on, he was trying to heal himself. He never could, because it's an incurable wound. But so due to him trying to heal himself, even though unsuccessful, he created all these different healing ways and healed, thousands upon thousands of other people. And so that's kind of a teaching, our own wound, our own suffering that we may never ever heal completely. By us addressing that, that's going to give us the gifts to help other people, so our wound can help other people. And so he, continued to try and heal himself and never did. And this is where his story overlaps with Prometheus, who stole the fire from the gods and gave it to humanity. Chiron loved the gods and he loved humanity. He was kind of in the middle, and he taught, the half god, half humans. And so he heard Prometheus had done that, and Prometheus he was sentenced because of what he did to be chained to this rock, and every day this eagle would come and eat out his liver, and then it would grow back again, and every day that would happen. And the only way Prometheus could get released is if an immortal traded places with him. So Chiron, heard of this, and then Chiron within himself had this understanding of like, well, how can I actually live if I can't die? How I won't actually ever have lived, and he was kind of jealous of humans and how they were born and then they died, so their life was precious, and so him suffering too, it was kind of like, okay, well, I'm I'm just suffering forever anyway. So he traded places with Prometheus and then gave up his immortality, and so then he became mortal, and then he died. So he was born immortal, gave up his immortality, and then now he went into the underworld where he met his other brother, who was Hades, and from that, Zeus was like, oh, well, because of, his kindness and And this act that he did, I'm going to now immortalize him in the heavens as the sign of Sagittarius. So he was then placed in the heavenly realm, you know. So now he was immortalized. So he'd been through, he was immortal, and then he gave up his immortality, and then he, you know, became mortal and went into the underworld, and then he got immortalized and went into the heavenly realm, you know. And then now in 1977, he comes back to us as a little planetoid, you know. So he's gone through all these layers. That's why he's the weaver, you know. His story is one of the great quest of healing, you know, and understanding life and death and mortality and immortality so yeah, his story is just full of these teachings, you know, just by sharing the story alone, you know, and applying it to our own life too. And so one of the great teachings of that story is that um you know, his death and going, and he gave up that immortality, but he also, it's like dying to the view that suffering is negative, you know, dying to that viewpoint. And then that's how he became immortalized. When you realize and accept like suffering as a part of life, the perspective, instead of good and bad, it's like now you move out of that black and white, you know, and you understand, oh, you know, healing is a part of life, you know, suffering is a part of life. And when you accept it, then that's where the immortalization comes in, you know, and that's where real truth and wisdom and understanding is born from. So,
Wow.
so yeah, that's my interpretation of,
No, that was,
you know,
dude, that was
story.
absolutely incredible. That was absolutely incredible. And it helps people understand the frequency of Chiron, because there's the mythological Chiron that's then applied to this celestial body. You know, so you're taking on the frequency of Chiron when they gave that name, and it has all this history, this alchemical history, this mythological history. And, you know, it sounds very similar to other healer leader people that, you know, are around the world in their mythologies. There's those patterns that come into play, and it's so powerful. But, you know, we got all the time in the world. We got as much time as we want, but I want people that are interested in what you're talking about, especially with the living astrology, because everything you said was interesting. So you know, they want to know more about you. How do they find out about living astrology? How do they find out about the School of Living Astrology?
Well, everything can be found on my website, which is, you know, thechironium.com, you know, so THE and Chironium, CHIRONIUM. And that's where the school is hosted. You can find information about that. Also, earlier this year, my partner and I, we started doing YouTube videos. So I have the Chironium YouTube channel. I had to take a break because I just became a father.
Congratulations!
2 months ago.
Wow!
Thank you.
2 months ago. So what month is this? This is October. So then it was August.
Yeah, August 31st.
I have a daughter who's born on August 31st, actually.
You do?
Yeah, I do. My fourth child, my daughter Lotus, she was born August 31st.
Wow, yeah, same birthday.
Yay, all right. It sounds like we'll be having some shared birthday parties in the future.
Yeah.
Dude, let me tell you, Virgos, you already know. I don't need to tell you anything, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, they're fun. You know, I'm a Libras and Virgos. Let me tell you, that's very general though. When I say Libras and Virgos, what I'm saying is very, very general. Tyler will tell me that's extremely general, but you know, there's in that general.
Well, I mean, you know, our sun, you know, that simplified version is just, you know, our sun, you know, expresses that quality of that, you know, that sign. So actually the term, instead of saying I am a this, you could just say my sun, my heart expresses through this sign, you know, because we all have every sign within us. We all have an Aries side, a Taurus side, a Gemini side. But yeah, you know, there obviously the sun is a very important part of our chart, and it's, you know, it's where the light comes from.
Why is it that people focused on that so much to make kind of like this really palatable, simple astrology? Why do they focus on the sun side so much?
Because of, you know, obviously it's the central part of the chart. It's easy, and it can be written really easily.
Okay,
You know,
there you go.
and the idea of it could be very much sold, and there was a
Sure.
time where, fortune telling and all of that, became a thing. And yeah, and again, generalized, right?
Right.
It's just that, and it's 1 in 12, you know. So
So okay, so let's say
I always joke
somebody.
and say that I knew there was more than 12 people on this planet, when I understood, that there was depth. And then each sign too has 30 different degrees, and then the signs themselves, that 12 breakup pattern, is
Uh-huh.
more for our mind. And the beginning of a sign much different than the end of a sign. So I always tell people, think less in terms of pie slices and think as a rainbow, right? Each sign slowly shifts into the next. It's like green slowly going to yellow, yellow slowly going to orange.
Yeah,
And
these aren't
uh,
these hard cutoffs. There's actually a little
yeah,
bleed over in frequency of color frequency, and then the energy of the
yep,
signs. There's bleed over. Okay, so look, let's say somebody out there that's listening around the world, they want to get a reading from you personally, like they want a living astrology reading from you personally. Do you do that anymore?
yeah,
Or you do?
yes,
So then how would they get a
yeah,
hold of you if they wanted to do just that? Maybe not sign up for the school, which is so beautiful and you
uh-huh.
should sign up for, actually give it my highest recommendation, but they want to get a reading from you. Where do they get that?
Well, they can basically, if you go to my website, there's a tab that is consultations, and that tells you all about, the process of it and how to email me. Basically,
Okay.
there's a little form there. Yeah, and then basically just through email we correspond and then set up a time and schedule. And right now I get booked up. There's waves that come in and out, so sometimes it's a little far out until we can get together. Um,
You get there
but
eventually,
yeah,
right?
that's how you can find, out about that. And then this,
Cool.
like I said, everything's on the website, the school, the consultation work. And then, yeah, and a lot of my focus now too is you know I'm really, really, over the last 2 years, have gotten obsessed with the world of cameras and film photography and cinematography, and making videos. So yeah, YouTube is a big thing I've wanted to do, is just share a lot of these teachings on YouTube. And it's not just astrology; it's all things of the Chiron arts, and interviewing other people too, and just making nice quality cinematic videos, because I love creating things. I'm a very
Sure.
creative person, and so I love story. And so I was like, oh, I love photography and making videos and putting the stories and my creativity. That's something I really want to do. So you can find me again on YouTube at, find the channel is called the Chironium.
The
Um,
Chironia.
and then, yeah, and then obviously there's Instagram. I have the Living Astrology um, Instagram page where I post a lot of photos too, and yeah, all those social media things. If you search,
You'll
the
find it.
Chironium or Living Astrology, you'll probably find it.
Or School of Living
Um,
Astrology. Literally, actually,
yeah,
all you have to do is put in, I did this on Google. You just put in Living Astrology and just Tyler. Living Astrology Tyler, you'll find it. But School of
yeah,
Living Astrology, boom, that's even going to find it even faster. The Chironium, you'll find it. We'll put the website, of course, is going to be on our website, Midnight on Earth. When we post the episode, you'll see it. You'll have all the information. So you'll be able to find Tyler. And, we're going to have Tyler back in the future. We want more of his consultations. We want to get his opinions on world events as things go through the Living Astrology filter. Is that okay? Can we touch base with you in the future, Tyler?
yeah, definitely.
All right. Well,
Yeah, I love this. I've been interviewed once before, but like the world of podcasts, I listen to a lot of different podcasts, when I'm working sometimes and stuff. So I'm all about, participating in that. And I love the free form talk, just kind of like conversating and sharing. Cause I do a lot of like, in my school, okay, I'm making a lesson and I have to like sit and talk to a camera by myself. I love the
right.
back and forth, allowing my Libra to move, you know.
And my Libra, because we're both Libras,
Yeah.
and we both have daughters born August 31st. This is so cool. I
Yeah,
have a
that's
feeling
great.
we're going to hang out really soon. I mean, we have mutual friends. You know, episode
Yep.
4, Jason Scott, Alchemy and Spagyrics. Go back and listen to that episode. It was so good. You know, he's a mutual friend. We're all mutual friends because we're spiritual people. We have similar frequencies, and we're on a spiritual path. And the goal of humanity, I think, is to initiate a heaven on earth. We just have to make the earth the best possible planet we can be. And I'm doing it with this podcast, and Tyler's doing it with his School of Living Astrology. Jason Scott's doing it. So many people are doing it. And we're just out there making the world a better place.
Yep.
All right, man. Well, on that note, we're just going to go ahead and hit the outro music.
Awesome.
We'll see you next
Thank you.
time. Thank you for being on the
Yeah.
show. Midnight on
Thank
Earth,
you.
y'all.
Appreciate it.